Good evening. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I am a veteran attorney and advocate, and you are listening to the new show, again called The Veterans Voice on 790 KABC. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. This show is all about veterans, very much focused on veterans, not only about disability claims, which is what I do. I will help give you guys some tips, some ideas, what to expect while you're going through the process. In addition to that, we're going to take some time to kind of highlight some issues in the veteran community. And in addition to that, do some interviews of past clients. Today, we're actually going to have Violet, who works in my office as a paralegal. She is also a U.S. Army veteran. And her and I have had the unique experience to work alongside veterans who have been incarcerated. And that may have something to do with maybe mental health issues. It may not. It doesn't really matter. We learned a long time ago not even to pay attention to the reason why they're incarcerated. But we also call them the forgotten veterans. What we learned is that we started getting letters from veterans groups and veterans who are incarcerated that were asking for help, and they would just randomly show up in our mailbox. And the most common thing that we would hear is nobody responds. So I identified Violet in our office, and her and I not only visited prisons, but in addition, she is a dedicated paralegal for all of our forgotten veterans. Violet, are you with us?
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, thank you for joining us. I don't know if you heard my whole intro there, but I was just talking about our experience with working with incarcerated veterans. Would you like to give me a little bit of feedback from your perspective? But before we do that, let's start with your Army. I mentioned you were an Army veteran. Can you tell me a little bit about your service?
Yes, I was in the Army Reserve, got activated for Gulf War, the first one in 91. So I served over in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. And then I served another few years, and now I work with veterans, which is great.
Awesome. And what did you do when you were in the Army?
I was a lab tech. We had like an evacuation hospital, and I, drew blood, and it was really rewarding.
Awesome. And that initially rolled over into your civilian life. You worked at a hospital for 25 years?
Yeah, 26.
Awesome.
Until you stole me.
I was going to say, and how did you end up becoming a paralegal? Let's talk about that.
You talked me into it.
I did. I've known Violet for a very long time. One of the things that she did at the hospital is she taught customer service in orientation. So I knew that I could teach her whatever I needed to teach her about veterans law. What I needed was her personality, her respect, her customer service skills, all that kind of thing. So she does jokingly say that I stole her, but I did steal her from her 25-year job.
It's very rewarding.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about how you kind of got involved with working with the forgotten veterans, the incarcerated veterans.
A couple of years ago, we had decided that we should visit. I think you got a letter, or you had a client, and he talked about having a veterans group. So in some prisons, they actually let the veterans meet and connect with each other. And so they had invited Amanda up to talk to the group, and I went along with her. And we did that 2 or 3 times, 2 years in a row until COVID hit. And, unfortunately, who knows when we'll be able to get back in there. But I just realized the first time we did it at Mule Creek State Prison, how, like Amanda said, they are just so desperate for answers, and no one responds to them. And these are veterans. They served their country, and a lot of them are in prison because of their military service, meaning maybe they have PTSD and they made a wrong decision and now they're incarcerated. Maybe they had a back injury and they overdosed on medication, made some bad decisions, and now they're incarcerated. So just talking to them and hearing their stories was amazing. And it just really tugs at your heart because nobody responds to them. They're absolutely correct. Nobody responds. And it's so easy for Amanda and I just to write them a letter or check in with them or try to help them with their cases.
I remember that very first visit that we went to Mule Creek, and, it's me and 2 women walking into a men's prison. We were hosted by the chaplain. He's the one who walked us in, going through all the security, all of that. And then we get into where they met during the chapel, what they call the chapel, and we were waiting for them to come in from the yard. And we were in the chaplain's office, And there's this knock on the window, and it was our client. And he was like, hi, waved and told us to come out. And so two women go in, we're in heels, walk into the chapel. I looked at the chaplain, I was like, are we okay to go? And he's like, oh, yeah, go. And so you walk into a room, and there was, 45 men in there, something like that. And they walked us right up to the front, pulled up chairs. And then what was the first thing they do when they call the meeting to order? They say a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. And as soon as they did that, I was like, oh, we're fine. Because, regardless of whether they're incarcerated or not, they still have a huge respect for their country. They still say the Pledge of Allegiance. They still all called us ma'am, which was pretty amazing. And
Absolutely.
we had initially kind of prepped a little bit of what to say to them. And then what we really quickly discovered was that our time was better spent by just answering questions. And so there's some uniqueness with incarcerated veterans. Can you explain that a little bit, Violet, as to kind of how their pay structure changes and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so when you're incarcerated, if it's been longer than 60 days, you still are entitled to some compensation, but whatever it is, 50, 60, 90, it goes down to 10%. So what a lot of vets, some of them don't even know this, but what we try to do is just explain to them, you can have that 10% and then you can have the rest apportioned to your family. There's a lot of things that they can't do. Like they can't call me and ask me questions. Very rarely do they have phone privileges and no computer privileges. So it's painstaking through letters, back and forth, but they have intelligent questions. They just want me to look up something. A lot of them need help with the apportionment paperwork for their families because they desperately want their families to get that money. That's probably the main concern of most of the vets that write me, that they want the family to be taken care of.
Thank you. You're listening to 790, The Veterans Voice. I'm speaking with Violet Roman. She is a paralegal in my office and also a U.S. Army veteran. We're talking about the difficulties in kind of navigating the process when you're a veteran who is incarcerated. And since we're on this show, I've done a couple of prison radio shows out of Texas, been a guest on those. But for the most part, those of you who are hearing my voice are not going to be the incarcerated veterans, but their families who can help them. So, Violet, what would you say is kind of one of the messages to the spouses? I know you've talked to many spouses. What would you say that maybe their number one question is, or how we end up helping them?
Number one question is usually trying to get some of the apportionment, some of the disability. A lot of them don't even understand the process. A lot of the vets don't even know where their cases are in the VA system because they move. One thing I have found out is they get moved a lot, especially with COVID. So they haven't seen paperwork from the VA in months. The family can't get anywhere. So a lot of time it's just trying to figure out where their cases are at the VA. And how they can move forward. A lot of questions we don't do, we're not criminal lawyers, so I can't help them with their actual cases, but I have spent many an hour looking up criminal lawyers in that state and sending them, especially family members, sending them the information. So.
Absolutely. And one of the, just to kind of maybe help explain it a little bit more with the apportionment. So say a veteran has an overall service-connected disability rating of 90%. So that would mean that if they were not incarcerated, they'd be getting about $2,100 a month that is tax-free to help support it. Once you're incarcerated for a 60-day period of time, you only get paid at the 10% rate, which is only about $140 a month. So $140 when you're incarcerated is not so bad, and definitely needed. They do care about that. But the apportionment, their family, if there is a financial need, the family can apply to the VA and say, I'm struggling financially, and the VA will redirect that additional 80% to the spouse and to the family. So but as you can imagine, like I said, no internet access, not like they could just download the form and file it. CalVet is a state organization that is supposed to have a veteran service officer assigned to every prison in the state of California. However, that's not our experience. Correct, Violet?
That is absolutely correct. I feel like I should be getting paid as a CalVet because I do so much research.
Right.
Just questions, they need answers,
Yeah, absolutely. I will remember the second time we did visits, we went to Avenal State Prison as well. And it was a similar experience where we met in the chapel. Everybody was super respectful. We've gotten a lot of clients out of that, which is really awesome just to know that we're able to help them. But do you remember the story about when they pulled out the piece of paper and read what the VSO had written to them?
Oh, that she wasn't the person to be writing, or stop writing her or something?
Yeah, she basically responded, not on Calvet letterhead. It was just a single piece of paper that was typed up. Yeah. I can't come out and visit you. We don't do that. So that's when we really started coining that term of forgotten veterans. And we promised each other that we would never forget about them, that we would always respond to their letters and to their families' letters as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Violet. Can you stick on for another segment so we can talk a little bit about your work as a paralegal?
Absolutely.
I would greatly appreciate that. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice on 790 KABC. Up in the next segment, we're going to talk additionally with Violet about kind of her experience working from a paralegal perspective, similar to what we did last week with Ed. So thank you for sticking on with us, and we will be right back. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I am a veteran advocate and attorney with the Veterans Law Group. It is an honor and privilege to work not only on behalf of veterans every day to help them get their disability benefits, but also to work alongside veterans. Most of the paralegals and the staff in my office are either veterans themselves, spouses to veterans, including our most recent hire, who is a wife of a Vietnam veteran. She is on her third career, decided she wanted to be a paralegal because she didn't like being retired, so she's awesome. Welcome, Violet.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you for being here. We were talking in the previous segment about incarcerated veterans, and we can touch on that a little bit as it comes up. But I just wanted to have you talk a little bit about what your experience is like working with veterans, not only alongside veterans, but also helping to support them and their families through this process. What would you say is probably the biggest frustration?
Biggest frustration is how slow the VA works, and how difficult it seems to be for the vets to get compensation.
Absolutely. And speaking of how long it takes, we just recently wrapped up a case that he had been fighting the VA for 20 years. When he initially came to the VA and filed for compensation, they denied his mental health condition at a 0%. That was back in 2020. In 2000. And then we ended up taking his case up in 2013, I believe. And I'm speaking about Benny Violet, who you know very well.
I do.
Can you tell me a little bit about Benny? Or tell the audience.
Oh, Benny, he's just so much fun. He calls every day, likes to check in. He calls it his West Coast update from the East Coast. And he's a character, but I think we all here consider him a friend, because he will just call to say hi.
Absolutely. And when we wrapped up his case, his biggest concern was that was it okay if he could continue to call when he wanted to? And we laughed and said, absolutely. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his case because it is unique. The reason why people always ask, why does it take so long? And some of it is bureaucratic red tape, and some of it is not quite getting things in a row. I mentioned last week, and I often mention that our job in representing veterans before the VA is to make it as easiest as possible for the VA to grant their case. So if you need A plus B equals C, we give them A and B and point them to C. So in Benny's case, it was a mental health condition. And what the regulation states is that you have to, unless it's PTSD, they treat that a little bit differently. But in his case, it's another type of mental health, which I won't get into. But you would have to have symptoms either in service or within 1 year after you left the service. And Benny was diagnosed and hospitalized for the first time 18 months after he left the service. So he was just 8 months too late. And what that ended up turning into is the VA said, not related to your service. And so, like I said, he had been working it for a number of years on his own. What's amazing is that he never dropped his case. So when that case is that old, he got all of that back pay. He got 20 years worth of back pay in multiple lump sums because we'd get him a little farther and a little farther. Once we got him service connected, then they rated him at 30%. And what was hilarious about it is that I knew, like I said, he calls every day. You can't really understand a lot of what he's talking about. And I thought there is no way that the VA is going to rate him anything other than 100%. And have you ever worked with his mother?
Yes.
And she's quite a piece of work as well. And she actually came to the hearing, and I did some interview with her, and she was the reason why we finally got him service connected is because on the form that she filled out when he was first hospitalized, she said that he had been having symptoms since he came back from the Army. And that was what the judge hung her hat on and was able to make it service connected. But again, he was rated at like a 30 or a 50%. And that was just a real honor to be able to call him. We have our daily huddles where we get on the phone all together, no matter where anybody is. And we called Benny to tell him that his case got granted. Those are awesome calls.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we live for here.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a favorite client that you might want to tell us about?
My favorite client, I really like speaking to someone that, like George, he's one of my older guys, and he's very patient. He served in Korea and Vietnam, and just so frustrated with the VA, but he checks in every single week. I look forward to his calls because he's just, a character, funny old guy. And he's one of those guys that, he did what he did. He served his country, and all he wants is just a little compensation for his back, which he deserves. And why the VA is fighting him on it all the way, it's a tragedy. But he has a good heart and a good spirit, and I really enjoy just his patience, not only with the process, but with me, because every week I don't really have much to tell him. I'm like, sorry, they haven't made a decision yet. So it's hard. That's the hard part of our job is trying to explain what's taking so long when we don't even know ourselves.
Yeah, and we definitely, part of our mission is to, walk beside the veteran and their family and help them to navigate this process. And again, sometimes it takes so long because you end up going up and down the Court of Appeals. Other times we turn around and we can get a case flipped back around within 6 months if it's a no-brainer. But it's somewhat unpredictable and all across the board. You mentioned something when you mentioned George that I hear that a lot too of veterans that say it's not really about the money. They just want the VA to acknowledge that they got injured, acknowledge the mental health issue. It's often not about the money, but in some cases it can definitely be about the money. You're listening to 790 KABC. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I have with me today, her name is Violet. She is a U.S. Army veteran, and she is also a paralegal in my office. And we're just talking a little bit about navigating the process with the VA in order to get disability benefits. One of the things I wanted to mention when we were talking in the last segment about incarcerated veterans is this isn't specifically related to disability compensation, but if you're a family member and one of your family members is incarcerated because of a mental health issue, there was a law that was passed in California recently that allows them to relook at the sentencing if part of the reason why they are incarcerated has something to do with their mental health. So I know that you've received a bunch of letters about that as well. Is that right, Violet?
Yes, that is correct. A lot of the vets heard about it and just want more information. The lack of information in today's prisons, along with so many other horrible conditions, is just appalling. I try to send out as many letters as I can, just informing them of what they can do to catch up on that law.
Absolutely. And we've been contacted by some attorneys as well that are representing the veterans and asking for us to send a copy of like their medical records and that kind of thing so they can help kind of navigate this resentencing. I want to talk briefly again about the incarcerated veterans is that let's talk about Peter. Remember Peter?
Yeah.
Yes. Peter was one of those cases. He was in the initial visit that we went to Mule Creek, and he is, 6'7" at least, something like that?
Oh, at least, yeah.
Very tall man, very long beard, could come across as very intimidating. But he walked right up to me, looked me directly in the eye, and he said, I'm currently 100% rated. I am getting, of course, he's only getting paid at the 10% rate. But they were going to reduce him to 10% overall because he didn't go to an examination. Now, as you can imagine, if they're incarcerated, they can't exactly show up to an examination. And we
Right.
see that often, that the VA doesn't put it together that they're incarcerated. So the VA is supposed to send somebody out to the medical or to the prison facility to do an examination. In his case, they actually had done that. And do you remember why he didn't see the doctor?
He didn't trust it?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so oftentimes what happens is they don't know if it's a prison doctor or if it's a doctor from the VA, and they really do not like to talk about mental health issues with the prison facilities. So that's another kind of common thing that we see is we'll pull the medical, maybe they've been incarcerated for 10 years, we'll pull the medical records from the prison, and it's not even showing up at all that they have a mental health condition. You've seen that, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And generally it's that they don't why would you say they don't trust the doctors?
Well, a lot of vets don't trust doctors and the government because of how they've been treated by the VA.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a certain amount of stigma that they don't want, them being treated differently because they have a mental health diagnosis. They're already incarcerated. They certainly don't want to be locked up any more than they already are.
True.
So we just have a few minutes here with Violet left. And Violet, is there anything else you'd like to talk about, just your experience with your job and working with veterans and alongside veterans?
I would say that my main joy, obviously, is helping the veterans, but it's also very frustrating that the lack of information that they get when they get out of the military, which as a veteran myself, I don't remember even having a debrief on any medical conditions I may have and what to do about that. So I feel that education for the vets when they come out of the military, that first year is so critical, as we know, because I feel I spend a lot of time educating veterans, including my own father and my own brother, who I eventually did get service connected. Because they didn't know. My dad thought, Vietnam was 50 years ago. He didn't even know he was entitled, which he absolutely is.
Yeah.
Same thing with my brother, who's in the Gulf War with me, and same thing. He didn't know he could be compensated for some of his conditions. So
and we're still working on your dad on pushing those things that he doesn't want to file for. So we're always helping out family members as well. Most of our pro bono work in our office is family members and friends. So thank you so much for being with me, Violet. Thank you for helping me to highlight what's going on with our forgotten veterans. And thank you for your service as well. You're listening to 790 KABC. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. Welcome back. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I am a veteran attorney and advocate currently working for the Veterans Law Group. And we have a special guest today with us who is going to talk a little bit about his case and working with us. His name is Tim. Thank you, Tim, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let's just start a little bit of background. Tell me where you served, when you served, a little bit about your service.
Well, I joined in 2007. I was in Texas, and a young kid, 18 years old, decided to join up and change my life, I guess you could say.
And you joined the Army.
I joined the Army. And I went through basic training, and actually my unit deployed right before I got there. So I went through a quick 10-day readiness training and immediately deployed to Iraq.
Wow.
My first tour.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as bad, I guess you could say. It was a pretty decent tour, I guess, for as far as going to Iraq goes.
How? And when were you over there?
2007 to 2008.
Okay, so not a fun time.
Not a fun time.
Definitely.
But it wasn't the worst time. My second deployment was more of the, I guess, the harshness of being a soldier.
And how long were you deployed the first time?
Just 13 months, I think, because they got extended 15 months, but I deployed late, so I just was enough for the 13 months.
Okay, and how long were you home before they redeployed you again?
I want to say a year. I want to say it was a year total, but it felt like 6 months. Came home, you get a month off, and then pretty much right back to work, and then going through OTC and things like that, and being in the field, you're gone for pretty much half the year.
Absolutely. And at that time when you were deployed, were you married, kids? What was going on at home?
I got married after I came home from my first deployment.
And when was your first kid born?
Actually, during my second deployment in April 23rd, 2010? No, 2009. 2009.
Okay, so as long as I've known you, you've always had young children as well.
Yes.
And I would say that one of the things that I see a lot and I hear talked about a lot is because you guys had multiple deployments dealing with some pretty harsh issues, there's a lot of the PTSD comes from that, like just like you were saying, that you didn't really get a time to breathe or to even like reacclimate to home before you were then sent back overseas. And it sounds like you lost or you missed the birth of your first child.
Yes.
Okay. What did you do in the military?
I was a cavalry scout. I was supposed to do a bunch of fun stuff like reconnaissance and stuff like that, but I really just ended up doing the typical soldier job, I guess you could say. We did patrols, raids, gate guard, security detachments for the sergeant major, the colonel, stuff like that. It wasn't anything special.
But it's fair to say that you saw quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. And when you got back, how long? When did you get out of the service?
My ETS date was May 10th, I believe, or May. It was like May 10th or May 15th or something like that. 2010.
2010. Okay. And the last segment we were talking with one of the paralegals in my office, Violet, and a little bit about, what she wishes could happen. And she really felt like that a lot of veterans are not properly educated when you're getting out of the service about VA disability benefits and that kind of thing. Was that your experience, or were you clearly told what you needed to do?
Okay. Absolutely. We got home in February of 2010, and I had about 54 days, I think, of leave accrued that I needed to use. Mm-hmm. And I guess I don't even remember the program or whatever they're supposed to. It's like ACAP or something that they're supposed to send you through when you ETS, and they explain all that stuff. But they're like, "Oh no, just sign out and turn your gear in, and you're good. You don't have to come back." I was not given any instructions or details or any kind of knowledge about seeing a doctor or disability or anything like that.
Yeah, that's often called the TAPS class is what they call it. It is one of the many boxes that you're supposed to check in order to get out of the military, but I hear that story all the time is, one, they waived it, didn't require you to go, or two, you've got so many boxes to check, you're not really mentally checked into this hour-long program to tell you about your benefits. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Absolutely. So were you... how did you get in, how did you educate it or even to know what you needed to do to file?
Honestly, it took me, I want to say, 3 or 4 years of trying to be a civilian on my own and obviously not having any success and not being able to secure a job or anything like that before I even thought about the idea of like PTSD and things like that. And then I seen a doctor and they were just like, yeah, like you're definitely experiencing all these things and you should probably speak to someone from the VA about it and see if you can get some compensation for it. So,
all righty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to come back to that here in a minute. You're listening to 790 KABC. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I'm speaking with Tim, a U.S. Army veteran, has gone through the process, was a client of ours, and we're just going to talk about his experience as far as, what's going on with his case, what happened with his case, that kind of thing. So, Tim, you mentioned that you were struggling to hold down a job. Was that because you had a hard time finding one, or you had a hard time keeping one due to your PTSD?
Well, I would fill out the, I guess you could say, like assessments that they had. Mm-hmm. And I just never got a call back. I really couldn't. I couldn't even get past an interview.
Okay. And I remember...
I didn't really understand why.
Yeah, and I remember at one point you did work for a period of time as a security guard at night. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you had a hard time even following through with that, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. As much as
there was a lot of details and stuff that I wasn't able to keep up with for them.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about that. And I am, like I said, when we first brought you on, you can talk about as much of this as you want to as far as the in-depth of your PTSD, but I'm going to respect if you don't want to dig into it too deep. One of the things I do hear a lot is just what you said, is the PTSD can affect your memory. It can affect your ability to focus on details. Is that what was going on?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So difficulty with concentration?
Yeah, especially with tedious details of, keep things organized and filling out logs and like, accurate descriptions of stuff and everything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to just do a little bit of education to our public here about the ratings for PTSD. So when it comes to PTSD, it's kind of a little bit unique. It's different than other mental health. If you were shown to have served in combat, it doesn't matter if it's 20 years later you're diagnosed with PTSD, they will assume it had to do with your combat service. So you don't have to fit that diagnosis within the first year. It can be many years later. And because of that, I'm working with veterans right now that are from Vietnam era and are filing for their PTSD. But what the VA does is the regulations that cover all mental health, it just has a list of symptoms. So like Tim served in combat, he had a PTSD diagnosis. They presumed it was because of his combat. Then what we're dealing with is how severe is it, how bad it is. And so PTSD and all mental health is rated the same way. It starts at 10%, goes to 30, 50, 70, 100. And again, it's solely based upon the list of symptoms. So part of our job as representatives is to help encourage the veteran to be very vocal and proactive about what their symptoms are. And as I always say, how bad they are on your worst day. The VA is supposed to rate you on your worst day. That's the same is true for your back or any of them. But what happens a lot with mental health is you go into the C&P examination, you're talking with maybe a therapist, maybe a physician's assistant, maybe an MD. You've never spoken to them before, and you're supposed to dump on them the fact that you have suicide ideation, the fact that you can't concentrate. Tim, do you remember your first C&P exam?
No, I can't really recall it. Honestly, it was so long ago. I just remember the very last one that I had that before they made me permanent total.
Right. And it looks like that you initially started the process and went through the process. Your case goes back to 2013, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And when you came to us in 2014, maybe I can help fill in some of the gaps because I know your case very well. You came to us in 2014 and you had a overall rating of, I believe it was 50% for your PTSD?
Yes.
Okay. And so in looking at the statute, that 50% shows panic attacks more than once a week, difficulty in understanding complex commands, difficulty in establishing and maintaining relationships, disturbances in mood. Those are the kind of things you're experiencing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it rocked my world. It pretty much deteriorated every relationship that I had towards family. And, I mean, there was a couple times that I tried to commit suicide.
Okay. So that automatically, that one issue should bump you up into the 70%. So when I'm looking at his case, we have a conversation about what his symptoms are. I'm looking at the rating sheet to say, oh, he should at least be a 70%, if not higher. So when we come back, I'm going to dig in a little bit more into what happened with his case and how we were able to get him what he needed and why Tim is still by far my favorite client ever. We'll be right back on 790 KABC. This is Amanda with the Veterans Voice. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice on 790 KABC. I am a veteran advocate, a veteran attorney, and I work on VA disability compensation claims. We have with us today Tim, who, as I mentioned before we broke the segment, I jokingly and seriously say that he has been my all-time favorite client that I've worked with, and we're going to talk about why that is. Welcome back, Tim.
Hey.
Hey.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So one of the things we were talking before we went on the break is the different symptoms that you have to prove in order to get a higher rating. You came to us at a 50%. You were struggling with working, holding down a job, and you had mentioned to me that you had struggled with some suicide attempts or suicide ideation, which is one of those symptoms that should bump you up into at least the 70%. So when we took on his case, I'm looking at, let's get him to 70%, but since he's struggling with working, the VA also has a provision that if you don't meet the 100% rating, but you're not able to work because of your service-connected disabilities, the VA will pay you at 100% rate as long as you're not working. And that was what we were pursuing there. Tim, do you remember anything about when you first came on board with us?
Honestly, I can't really remember much. I just know it was a fast process. I mean, you guys went in there and did your thing, and I felt like it was a 4-month period. It may have been a little bit longer than that, but I just remember I contacted you, and you dished me out some paperwork and told me what to do. And then from there, it was just kind of smooth sailing. Everything just started coming in clutch.
Well, I am glad you had that experience. I know your case was about 2 years old, or it took us about 2 years to get you what you needed. But I know initially you got that to that 100% rating pretty quickly, and then we just had to argue for an earlier effective date for it. Now, I'm going to tell them a little bit about my experience with working with Tim. Tim would send me these emails, and just kind of short. He's, as you can probably tell from his voice, he's kind of, comes across as very positive and happy. And I'm dealing with, dude, we got to show that this guy is struggling with suicide issues and relationship issues and all of that stuff. So I was going through his medical records prior to a hearing, and I kept finding counseling sessions that he was going to that he sounded great, and then he didn't sound great, and then he sounded great. So finally I sent Tim an email, and I don't know if you remember this, Tim, but I was like, you got to be able to explain all this stuff to me. And I believe your initial response was, well, sometimes my girlfriend's with me. So you didn't want to talk about how bad it was when your girlfriend was with you. Do you remember talking about that?
Yeah, I do remember.
And this was, you had been previously married in the military and then had divorced and was with somebody else at that time. And as Tim had mentioned, he's got to be quite the ladies' man, but he does struggle with maintaining relationships. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And maybe not establishing them, but maintaining them. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I feel like I'm pretty good at making the connection. It's just, keeping it together is not a big strong suit of mine. And
if you feel comfortable with talking about it, would you talk about like the PTSD and how it affects your relationships?
I guess I have a different kind of paranoia about things, trust issues. Obviously, I definitely react sometimes in a more aggressive or angry response system.
Yeah,
and I've probably gotten myself into a couple situations because I wasn't keeping them in check.
Okay, and that's definitely fair to say, and that's a very common symptom is, unprovoked responses to or things that are just blowing out of proportion about the situation that shouldn't be that bad.
Yeah.
And that's, comes down to, I know these are mental health issues, but this is all about his service. Tim is the last case that I ever read his entire comp and pen exam when he was already rated. So, for example, if somebody comes to me and they're not service connected at all, I have to read everything because I've got to be able to prove that the mental health has to do with their service. But if they're already rated and I'm just trying to get them a higher rating, I don't need to know what happened to him in the service. I didn't need to read what I read in his C&P exams. And I think part of that is why Tim sticks with me as well. But in addition to that, when I asked him to give me a response back as to why he's okay sometimes and not okay other times, and he mentioned his girlfriend was with him, I don't know if you remember, Tim, but it was a very long email to me. And what stood out to me is you made the comment, Amanda, I just want to be able to take care of my kids. And that shook me. And, he does have, how many kids do you have now, Tim?
I have 5 now.
What age ranges?
2, 3, 4, 7, and 12.
There we go. And you love your kids.
I do.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Deeply.
That's awesome. So yeah, you kind of rocked my world when you said that. And I believe you were like 26 at the time. And I'm like, this is a guy who spent a couple of years in the military. He's like my little brother and he just wants to be able to take care of his kids. So fast forward a little bit on your case. We eventually did end up getting him scheduled for a new comp and pen exam. We did help coach him with it and say, hey, you need to be really honest about how it is on your worst day. And that was the time that you were rated at the 100% level. Is that right, Tim?
Yes.
And just to give a little context, it's very difficult to get rated at 100% level for PTSD. To give you some ideas of symptoms, grossly inappropriate behavior, disorientation to time or place, persistent danger to self or others, inability to perform some daily activities. And it can also include hallucinations as well. But one of the things that the VA does, and this is how we end up fighting them for so long, is they gave him 100%, but only as the date of that new examination. So he was rated 50% for a year and a half. Then they gave him 100. So we went back and fought to get him that 100%. We did it under unemployability because the record showed he should have been at the 70. We argued he had difficulty with working and was able to get him to 100%. And you've been rated since 2013, is that right?
Yes. Well, I think, 2013 or 2014. I don't remember for sure.
I believe it's 2013. So one of the things that we're looking for in his case is sometimes the VA rates them and they rate them as permanent and total, which means they're permanently disabled. They will never be reexamined. In other cases, they will call them back for an exam about every 3 years to see if they might have some sort of improvement. And if they have improvement, they're going to drop their percentage. As you can imagine, once you get some financial stability underneath you, you can start working on other issues. And that was your experience as well, Tim. Did you start seeking treatment after you got some stability?
Yeah. Once I was able to be financially stable, I started being able to really focus on myself and not be stressed out about money issues as much. But I got, I did some years of therapy and other, means of healing. So,
but we certainly don't tell the VA you're doing better, correct?
Yeah, definitely not.
And that comes in with some of the fear. It's like if you go get some treatment and you get yourself into a better place, then you run the risk of if you open your mouth to the VA of saying I'm doing better, they'll send you to an examination. But you're considered permanent and total, correct? You won't be reexamined?
Yes.
That's
right.
And what does that give you? That give you a sense of stability, relief? How does that feel?
It's definitely a relief. I guess it was something that always hung over my head. But when I had my CMP exam, I just remember talking to the guy and he was like, yeah, I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna make 100 permanent total. He's like, you're doing okay, but you still need to be able to work on yourself and have time for yourself because you can tell the journey's not over, obviously.
You're listening to 790 KABC. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. I am speaking with Tim about his experience with navigating the VA process and working with our office. Tim, we previously talked on this show with a couple of the paralegals in my office, both of which are veterans. Were you aware that you were working with veterans that were paralegals in our office?
I actually wasn't aware.
Well, I think at the time it would have been Nicole, who was a Marine. But that's definitely something that is really important to us, is that it helps to the veteran to explain and to understand that we know what you guys are going through. I personally don't. I am not a veteran myself, but it's really important to me not only to employ veterans, but also so that they have a certain amount of empathy and understanding. In addition to that, a number of our paralegals are rated, and it does require us to do some sort of accommodation, I guess is what I would call it, because sometimes people who are struggling with mental health issues, they may need to take more time off work, or if they're struggling with orthopedic issues, they may need to go to more doctor's appointments, that kind of thing. So that's one thing that's really important. Tim, can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in your life now? How are you doing?
I guess I'm doing okay. Still obviously have a little bit of trouble keeping relationships going in my life. But I'm trying to put more positive work, I guess, in my life. And, I'm right now trying to learn and see where I can advance myself to the best of my abilities, given the circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you're doing positive things with what you've been given, the difficult road that you've been given. And I'm always proud of you as like my little brother. Periodically, Tim will check in probably about once a year. And I will never forget when you sent me a picture of you and your wife at the time and the kids in front of the Christmas tree. And you're always so thankful to our office. And because you do that, I tell them all the time, check in now and then. It's nice to know generally what happens when you work in this industry is once you get the veteran what they're entitled to, they go on about your life and you never really see them on the other side of feeling better and doing better. So when Tim had told me a while ago that he was in therapy and he was making some changes, it's like, I'm your biggest cheerleader, Tim. And I very much appreciate you being here and just thank you for your service. And I'm sorry of everything that you've gone through, but I'm proud of the man that you are.
And I've always appreciated you and everything you've done, for sure. You're a superwoman.
Well, thank you very much. You're listening to 790. That was Tim. This is Amanda with the Veterans Voice. I'm always honored to highlight the people who sacrificed so much for us so that we could live in the freedoms that we live in. And I'm sad for the downside of that of when we go to war, we don't just go to war. It affects people for the rest of their life. Like I mentioned before, I still work with Vietnam veterans that are struggling and have been struggling with PTSD since the time that they were in the service. And it's my honor to support them, help them, struggle with them. And it really comes down to being truly a rewarding job. And we'll be bringing you their stories every Tuesday night here on The Veterans Voice. See you next week.